Some truths remain buried for years, until the day they resurface and change everything. Callum, powerful, wealthy, yet completely unaware that he had lost his own son. One ordinary evening, he steps into a small diner, and fate is already waiting for him. While he's deep in conversation with a business partner, a little boy rushes in, clings to a waitress, and calls her mom. He doesn't think much of it until the boy looks up. Those eyes, unmistakable, his. But that is only the beginning. What Serafina says next shatters his heart. What had he missed in the last 5 years? Welcome back to Soul Stories. Get ready, because this story is just beginning. The soft chime of the diner's glass door rang out as a new customer stepped inside. Callum Hawthorne didn't pay it any mind. He entered with his usual air of quiet confidence, the perfectly tailored black suit accentuating his tall, commanding frame. His footsteps, steady, deliberate, seemed to quiet the space around him, as if the very air adjusted to his presence. Outside, autumn had settled over San Francisco in muted shades. The late afternoon sun filtered through the diner's windows, casting pale streaks of light across worn wooden tables. This small eatery in the Mission District carried an air of simplicity, a stark contrast to the opulence of the world Callum belonged to. But tonight, at his business partner's suggestion, he found himself here, a place he never would have imagined stepping into. They say this place has the best French onion soup in the city. James Adler, his dining companion, remarked with a slight smirk as he pulled out a chair. "You don't mind a little taste of the ordinary, do you?" Callum glanced at his wrist, the polished face of his Patek Philippe watch gleaming under the light. He didn't have time for outings like this, but James was a powerful figure in the tech industry, and maintaining their relationship was a necessity. "I'm not picky," Callum replied, his deep voice clipped and indifferent. Just then, from behind the counter, Serafina emerged with a tray in her hands. Her worn shoes barely made a sound against the tiled floor. Her dark hair was pulled into a loose bun, a few stray strands framing her face. A faded blue apron dusted with flour hugged her frame, and though her features carried a trace of exhaustion, they remained sharp, unyielding. She didn't notice him at first. She was focused on her work, weaving effortlessly between tables, balancing plates with practiced ease. But as she lowered a tray onto the table beside his, her gaze drifted toward the door. For the briefest moment, she froze. "Callum," her breath caught in her throat. Time seemed to fracture, the world shrinking to the space between them. The man she had once loved, the man who had walked away without a word. He was sitting mere feet away from her. There was no mistaking him. The sharp angles of his jaw, the strong bridge of his nose, and those piercing gray eyes. The same eyes that had once burned with passion. But now, all she could see in them was an unbearable distance. Her heart pounded so hard she was afraid it would give her away. Her fingers tightened around the handle of the tray, knuckles turning white. What should she do? Turn away? Disappear? But it was too late. If she had recognized him, then soon. Callum lifted his gaze. His eyes swept past her. A flicker of something flashed across his face, but only for a second. He didn't recognize her. Not immediately. 5 years had changed her. She was thinner, wearier, but her eyes, those he had once known, eyes that had once held nothing but love for him, now clouded with weariness, with pain buried too deep to be spoken. Serafina turned sharply, almost fleeing. She couldn't stand there another second. If she did, she wouldn't be able to hide what was breaking inside her. But there was no escaping this moment, because something she never saw coming was about to happen. In mere seconds, a little boy would come running in, and the word he was about to call her was something Callum never could have expected. Serafina felt the blood in her veins turn to ice. She couldn't let Callum recognize her. Not now, not ever. Fingers tightening around the tray, she forced herself to turn away, moving swiftly toward the kitchen, just another nameless waitress lost in the evening rush. She kept her head low, letting stray strands of hair fall over her face, shielding her features. Her heart pounded violently, each beat echoing in her chest like a warning drum. If she could just make it to the back, just slip behind that door, she would be safe. But as she pivoted, a glass slipped from her tray. Crash! The sharp shatter of breaking glass sliced through the quiet hum of the late afternoon. A few patrons turned to look, but Serafina didn't dare lift her head. She dropped to her knees, hands trembling as she hurriedly gathered the shards. And then she felt it. A gaze. Fixed. Unwavering. From the table near the door, Callum glanced up. At first, it was just a reflex, a reaction to the sudden noise. But then, his eyes lingered on the woman kneeling on the floor, carefully picking up each fractured piece. Something about her felt familiar. The shape of her face, the way her dark hair was carelessly tied back, the delicate yet resolute curve of her shoulders. A strange sensation stirred within him, like a memory buried too deep to surface, flickering at the edges of his consciousness. He didn't recognize her immediately. 5 years was a long time. And the Serafina standing before him now was not the carefree, radiant girl he had once known. But even without a name, the feeling remained. A quiet pull, a whisper in his mind, urging him to look again, to remember. Serafina could feel his stare piercing through her. She clenched the broken glass in her hand, barely registering the sharp sting as it cut into her skin. Only one thought consumed her. He cannot recognize me. Taking a steady breath, she rose to her feet, quickly wrapping the shards in a cloth. Without hesitation, she turned and strode toward the kitchen. But just as her fingers brushed against the wooden door, a voice sounded behind her. "Excuse me, but have we met before?" Callum had spoken. She froze, hand gripping the door handle, but refusing to turn around. She knew that if she faced him now, everything would come undone. A long silence stretched between them. Callum frowned slightly. He wasn't sure if he should press further. The woman, she reminded him of someone he should remember. But before he could say another word, a small voice cut through the air. "Mommy!" The single word shattered everything. And when Callum turned toward the sound, everything inside him changed. The diner door swung open with a familiar chime. A crisp autumn breeze rushed in, carrying scattered golden leaves from the sidewalk. A little boy, no more than 5 years old, burst inside, his small frame swallowed by an oversized navy hoodie. His tiny sneakers, decorated with cartoon characters, tapped lightly against the tiled floor as he ran, radiating the boundless energy of a child untouched by sorrow. "Mommy!" The word rang through the air, bright and unwavering. And in that instant, Serafina's world stopped. Her hand remained frozen on the kitchen door handle, her entire body locking in place as a tremor coursed through her. "No, no, no, no." The little boy ran straight toward her, his face glowing with unfiltered joy, completely unaware of the suffocating tension that had just crashed over the room. Callum looked up, instinctively, a child's voice, calling for his mother, with such love, such certainty. And then he saw him. The din of the restaurant faded into nothing. No voices, no clinking dishes, no shuffling footsteps. There was only the boy, and his eyes, gray, deep, unwavering. His eyes. This was no coincidence, no trick of the light. Those storm-colored eyes, so steady, so impossibly familiar, stared back at him from a face too young to be his own, yet carrying a resemblance that sliced through him like a blade. The fragments of Callum's past, the memories he hadn't even realized were broken, suddenly slammed into place. A truth he had never considered, never even imagined, now stood before him in undeniable clarity. His breath stalled. For the first time in his life, Callum Hawthorne, a man who controlled everything, felt utterly, completely powerless. A sharp, invisible blade seemed to pierce straight through Callum's chest. He stared at the boy, every small feature of that young face sharpening into unbearable clarity. Something was wrong. This wasn't just a fleeting intuition. It was real, tangible, like a puzzle with all the pieces in place, yet somehow he still couldn't see the full picture. Callum had always been a man with a keen eye. In the world of business, he could unravel hidden strategies, detect deception in the slightest shift of tone or gesture. But now, standing before this 5-year-old child for the first time in his life, he couldn't make sense of what he was seeing. The boy, Oliver. He didn't shrink back like most children would when faced with a stranger. He stood his ground, those bright gray eyes scanning his surroundings, observing, absorbing. Not the idle curiosity of a child, but the sharp, discerning gaze of someone who understood. Like him, was it just a resemblance? Or was it something more? But it wasn't just the boy that caught Callum's attention. It was Serafina. She was hiding something. Her body was tense, her hand resting on Oliver's shoulder, not just in protection, but in defense. A subconscious, instinctive act. She didn't want Callum looking at the boy. She didn't want him noticing him. Why? A thought struck him. It was insane, impossible, and yet, now that it had taken root, it wouldn't leave. His mind raced, calculating, piecing together fragments of time. How old was Oliver? Could he be? If so, why had Serafina kept this from him? Slowly, Callum lifted his gaze, locking onto her. Serafina wouldn't meet his eyes, and that alone was enough to confirm what he already suspected. He didn't have proof. Not yet. But one thing was certain. Serafina was hiding a truth he needed to know, and he wouldn't stop until he found it. Callum couldn't take his eyes off Serafina. Every muscle in her face was taut, like a mother lion standing protectively in front of her cub, ready to fight if cornered. She didn't speak, but Callum could feel it, tension radiating off her like a wire stretched too tight, moments away from snapping. He repeated his question, his voice lower this time, each word deliberate. Who was the boy's father? Serafina didn't flinch, but her chin lifted slightly, as if she had been expecting this. Her voice was cold, unyielding. He abandoned my son before he was even born. The room seemed to freeze. Oliver stood there, looking up at his mother, then back at the unfamiliar man before him. He was too young to fully grasp what was happening, but even a child could sense the heaviness in the air. Callum's hands curled into fists. A heat rose in his chest. Hot, suffocating, inexplicable. Abandoned, he echoed, as if the word itself was foreign to him. Serafina's lips twitched, but there was no mockery in her expression, only the hardened look of a woman who had learned to protect herself from pain. Didn't hear me the first time? Or do you want me to say it again? Callum tilted his head slightly, his gray eyes darkening. I want to know exactly who he is. Serafina let out a quiet, humorless laugh. A wealthy man, busy, too selfish to care about anyone but himself. Something dangerous flickered in Callum's gaze. His name, Serafina. Her fingers dug into her palms. You wouldn't know him, and you don't need to. Callum leaned forward, bracing his hands on the table, his voice dipping into something lower, almost predatory. I don't need to know, or you don't want me to know. Serafina clenched her jaw. I have no obligation to tell you anything. His stare never wavered. This wasn't the same girl he had known 5 years ago. That girl had been bright, full of life. This woman, she was steel, hardened, guarded. A fortress he couldn't break through so easily. How old is Oliver? His voice was steady, but the weight behind it was crushing. She stiffened. It doesn't concern you. Callum narrowed his eyes. He wasn't stupid. He had already put the pieces together, but he needed to hear it from her. He's 5, isn't he? Serafina said nothing. His heartbeat thundered in his chest. The numbers connected in his mind like clockwork, aligning into something undeniable. 5 years. That was exactly how long it had been since he and Serafina had last been together. His breathing grew heavier. The thought creeping into his mind was too big, too life-altering to fully accept. His hands clenched. His voice was controlled, but only just. Serafina, is he? She cut him off. Stop. For the first time, her voice wavered. You have no right to ask that. Callum raised an eyebrow. No right. That's right. You have no right. She took a deep breath, meeting his gaze head on. You weren't there when he needed you. You don't get to stand here now and pretend like you care. Callum stilled. The words sliced through him, sharp and precise. Serafina turned away, reaching for Oliver's hand. Come on, sweetheart. We're leaving. Oliver blinked but didn't protest, his tiny sneakers barely making a sound against the tile as he followed her. Callum remained frozen, staring after them, his mind spiraling with one inescapable thought. Do I have a son? Callum stood still, watching as Serafina and the boy disappeared through the door. But her words, sharp, unyielding, were lodged deep in his mind, refusing to fade. A cold gust of wind swept through the diner's glass windows, but it wasn't nearly as cold as the sensation creeping through his chest. He had convinced himself that the past was over, that Serafina was nothing more than a distant memory. But now, the past wasn't just haunting him. It was staring straight at him with his own eyes. Callum could not let this end here. He needed to know the truth. Callum Hawthorne didn't believe in coincidences. He was the kind of man who believed that everything had a pattern, a logical explanation. Data, evidence, numbers that didn't lie. Everything could be analyzed, deconstructed, controlled. But this evening, when his gaze locked onto the storm-gray eyes of that little boy, every rule he had ever trusted shattered. Oliver Ellis, just a child. And yet, in the briefest glance, Callum had seen himself reflected back. A smaller version of him, with an unmistakable gaze. And that was what he couldn't ignore. When he returned to Sterling Technologies, Callum didn't head straight for his office. Instead, he walked to his private floor at the very top of the building. This wasn't the office of a typical CEO, no grand walnut desk or leather chairs. It was a command center. 2 walls were lined with massive LED screens, displaying financial graphs, market trends, and live feeds of the company's latest technology projects. But tonight, none of it mattered. Callum strode to his desk, pulled open a drawer, and retrieved a sleek black phone, one that only a select few people had access to. A private network, untraceable, used only for matters he didn't want the world to know about. He dialed a number. A few rings. Then a low, familiar voice answered. Hawthorne, I need an investigation. Callum's gaze drifted toward the towering cityscape of San Francisco, where the evening lights had begun to flicker on. Target. Callum hesitated for only a second. Some part of him still resisted what his instincts were telling him. But he had to know. Serafina Ellis, and a boy named Oliver Ellis. A brief silence. Then, what are you looking for? Callum's jaw tightened. Everything. 24 hours later. The screen in front of Callum flickered to life, displaying a dossier. Comprehensive, meticulous. Serafina Ellis's life laid out in black and white. But Callum didn't care about what he already knew. That she had once studied culinary arts. That she had interned at an upscale restaurant before vanishing from the world they once shared. What did matter was the 5 missing years. After leaving New York, she had moved to Oakland, a city across the bridge, far from the glittering wealth of San Francisco. She had rented a small, 2-bedroom apartment in a working-class neighborhood. No marriage records. No partners listed. She had been alone. But the most damning piece of information, the one that sent a sharp, undeniable jolt through Callum. Oliver Ellis's birth certificate. Only one parent was listed. Mother, Serafina Ellis. Father, left blank. Callum's fists clenched. It wasn't unusual for a child to be born without a father's name on record. But in this case, what did it mean? Had Serafina deliberately erased the father's identity? Or was this proof that the father had never been in the picture at all? His breathing deepened. His gaze shifted to the next section of the file, photos of Oliver. One in the park, another in a classroom. Every angle, every frame only solidified what he already knew but hadn't wanted to accept. That boy was a part of him. But that wasn't enough. He needed proof. Callum pushed away from his desk and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring down at the city. He wasn't the type of man to assume anything. He needed something undeniable, scientific, something Serafina wouldn't be able to deny. He turned back, picked up the phone, and dialed again. The same voice answered, waiting for further instruction. Callum's voice was calm, controlled. Get a DNA sample from the boy. A pause. Then, I'll take care of it. The call ended. But the questions didn't. If Serafina had truly had his child, why hadn't she told him? Had she hated him so much that she wanted him erased from their son's life? Or was there something else, a truth he hadn't uncovered yet? Callum's jaw tightened. His gaze was sharp, steely. Whatever the truth was, he would find it. And when he did, Serafina wouldn't be able to hide from him any longer. Callum Hawthorne didn't believe in coincidences. He believed in proof. A gut feeling, no matter how strong, wasn't enough to make him act without evidence. Oliver's eyes might mirror his own, but only a DNA test could confirm the truth. And he needed a sample. Now, inside the small diner in Mission District, Oliver sat perched on a high chair near the kitchen counter, lost in the world of his drawings. His tiny fingers gripped a colored pencil, lips pressed together in deep concentration, brows furrowed as he filled the page with color. Serafina was busy tending to customers, her back turned to him. And that was the opportunity. A man entered the diner, unremarkable, blending effortlessly into the background. Short-cropped hair, a simple button-down, the kind of face no one would remember. He ordered a coffee and took a seat near Oliver, his demeanor casual, as if waiting for someone. He wasn't waiting for anyone. He was waiting for the perfect moment. Oliver swung his legs absent-mindedly beneath the chair, and in doing so, he dropped his colored pencil. Without hesitation, he hopped down to retrieve it, and a single delicate strand of hair slipped from his head, landing on the counter. The man didn't move immediately. Rushing was the enemy of precision. Instead, he reached for a napkin, casually wiping the counter as if cleaning up a stray spill. But in that same fluid motion, his other hand discreetly captured the hair. A single movement, unnoticed, flawless. He folded the napkin, tucking it into his pocket before taking a final sip of coffee. Then, just as unremarkably as he had arrived, he stood and walked out the door. No one looked up. No one suspected a thing. And inside his pocket, Oliver's DNA was secured. 30 minutes later, the delicate strand of hair lay on Callum's desk. He stared at it for a long time. Something so insignificant, yet capable of changing everything. If the DNA test confirmed that Oliver was his son, everything would shift. No more doubts, no more retreating, only the truth. Callum picked up his phone, dialing a number. I have the sample. Run the test immediately. I want results in 24 hours. A brief pause, then a professional voice answered. We'll prioritize it. You'll have your results by morning. Callum set the phone down, his gaze never leaving the fragile strand of hair. 24 hours. That was all that stood between him and the truth. And if Oliver was truly his son, Serafina wouldn't be able to hide from him any longer. Callum Hawthorne had never felt this kind of loss of control before. He hadn't slept all night. Not because of anxiety. He didn't believe in weak emotions like that. But no matter how hard he tried to push it away, the thought of a son he never knew existed refused to leave him. Callum had made decisions that changed the landscape of an entire industry. He had taken down the most ruthless competitors in the corporate world. But never had he felt himself being pulled into a vortex he couldn't escape. For the first time in his life, the outcome of something wasn't in his hands. And he hated it. When he stepped into his office that morning, a large, unmarked envelope sat neatly on his desk. He stopped, staring at it. The words printed on the front were simple, but the weight of them pressed down on his chest like a stone. Confidential DNA test results. His hand reached out, then hesitated, fingers hovering over the paper. He inhaled deeply, but it felt like no air reached his lungs. Opening this envelope meant accepting the truth. It meant there was no going back. Callum exhaled sharply, shaking off the absurd moment of hesitation. He had come this far. There was no stopping now. He picked up the envelope, ran his fingers along the seal, and pulled out the report inside. The first line listed Oliver Ellis's information. The second line listed his own. And the third. Result. Oliver Ellis is the biological son of Callum Hawthorne. The world tilted. Callum lowered himself into his chair, his eyes locked onto the words. Yet his mind went completely blank. The letters blurred, shifting on the stark white page. But their meaning was crystal clear. No more doubts. No more theories. Oliver was his. His grip on the paper tightened, his knuckles turning white. 5 years. 5 years. He had been absent for every single one of them. What had he missed? Who had been there when Oliver took his first steps? Who had held his tiny hands as he wobbled forward for the very first time? Who had heard his first words? And what were they? Mama, Cookie, Daddy. Callum didn't know. He knew the precise details of billion-dollar contracts. He could recite financial reports from memory. But when it came to his own son, asterisk, his own flesh and blood, asterisk, he knew nothing except a name. Oliver Ellis. That name suddenly carried a weight he had never imagined. Callum thought of all the small things. What did Oliver eat for breakfast? Did he throw tantrums? Was he afraid of the dark? When he was sick, who had held him? Not Callum. Not his father. He had not been there. And the realization tore through him. Callum shot to his feet and strode to the floor-to-ceiling window. Below him, San Francisco pulsed with life. Cars weaving through congested streets, sunlight bouncing off the gleaming skyscrapers. He barely registered any of it. He had thought he knew Serafina, but the truth was he knew nothing. She hadn't just walked away from him. He had left her, and she hadn't just taken her broken heart with her. She had taken his son. Callum squeezed his eyes shut, his breath coming hard and fast. A rage simmered in his chest, not directed at Serafina, but at himself. He had never let anything slip through his fingers. And yet, he had lost 5 years. 5 years of his son's life. That ends now. Callum turned back, grabbed the DNA results, and folded them carefully. Now he knew the truth. Now, he had a mission more important than any deal he had ever closed. He would confront Serafina. He would meet his son. And this time, nothing and no one would stop him. Callum just found out he has a son after 5 years. Stay until the end to see what he does next. Callum couldn't remember the last time he felt this out of control. He was always the one in charge. In negotiations, in relationships, in every facet of his life. He made the decisions. But now, all he had was the truth. A truth he couldn't change, couldn't control, couldn't buy his way out of. Oliver Ellis, his son. Callum's hands curled into fists as he stepped out of his office. He couldn't wait any longer. Serafina had hidden this from him for 5 years, had kept him away from his own child. That ended now. That evening, the San Francisco sky was painted in cold, muted grays, heavy with the promise of rain. Behind the kitchen counter of the small diner, Serafina worked in rhythmic precision, slicing onions on a worn wooden board. The restaurant was busier than usual, but she barely noticed. She had grown used to this routine, working from morning until night, keeping her mind occupied, forcing herself not to think about him. At least, that was what she told herself. But ever since that night, since Callum's gaze landed on Oliver, she had known. Nothing would ever be the same again. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to focus. Would Callum come back? Would he accept what she had told him? Or would he dig deeper? Her grip tightened around the knife as another, far more terrifying thought crept in. What if he already knew? She inhaled sharply. No, he couldn't. Then, the door swung open. A crisp gust of wind followed. She didn't need to look up to know who had just walked in. The entire atmosphere of the diner shifted. The low hum of conversation, the clatter of plates, everything seemed to pause, as if the very air had been sliced in half. Serafina slowly set down the knife, but she didn't turn around. Not yet. Stay calm, she ordered herself. Don't show him anything. Then his voice, low, sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. Why did you hide this from me? Serafina closed her eyes for a brief second before finally turning. Callum stood there, tall, immovable, his storm gray eyes locked onto her. In his hand was a familiar brown envelope. The DNA test results. Her throat went dry. He knew. The storm she had feared for years had finally arrived. But she didn't flinch. She met his gaze head on. Because you never wanted to know. A sharp, precise wound, cutting straight to Callum's chest. His face remained emotionless, but the way his grip tightened around the envelope told her everything. I never wanted to know, Callum echoed, his voice dangerously low. How was I supposed to want something you never told me existed? Serafina let out a quiet, humorless laugh. Did you ever give me the chance to tell you? His eyes narrowed. Chance? She crossed her arms, her stare turning icy. 5 years ago, you left without a word. You chose your company, your ambition, your life. And now you stand here, demanding answers like you were robbed of something. Callum's jaw clenched. Don't twist this, Serafina. I didn't come here to argue about the past. I came here to talk about Oliver. For the first time, Callum said their son's name, and something inside Serafina fractured. He said it like he had a right to. But where had he been? Where had he been when Oliver needed him? Her voice dropped to a chilling whisper. You don't get to talk about my son. 2 final words, heavy, sharp, deliberate. My son, not our son. Callum's fist clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. He's mine too. No, he's mine. Serafina's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. I was there when he was born. I was there when he cried, when he took his first steps, when he woke up in the middle of the night with a fever. Her breath hitched. Where were you, Callum? He didn't answer, because he couldn't. 5 years. He had lost 5 years. And nothing could change that. Serafina saw the silence settle over him. She saw the flicker of something in his expression, something raw, something painful. She took a breath, trying to keep herself steady. I didn't hide him to hurt you. I hid him because I refused to let Oliver grow up with a father who was only half there. If you truly cared, Callum, you never would have left in the first place. The words hit their mark. Callum's jaw tensed. His entire body was rigid, his breath controlled but heavy. She was right, and he hated it. But that didn't mean he was going to walk away. Not this time. He inhaled deeply, forcing himself to stay calm. I wasn't there. I missed 5 years. His voice was low, quiet, but there was something undeniable in it. But I'm not going to miss anymore. Serafina let out a bitter chuckle. You think it's that simple? Callum took a step closer, his eyes burning with something unshakable. No, I know it won't be simple, but I don't care. I will do whatever it takes to be his father. She opened her mouth to respond, but a small voice cut through the tension like a blade. Mommy, what's going on? Both of them froze. Oliver stood in the doorway, his round gray eyes blinking up at them, confusion written all over his small face. Serafina's heart stopped. Callum turned, his gaze locking onto the boy. For the first time, Callum didn't see a stranger. He saw his son. The air inside the small diner was so tense it felt like the very oxygen had been compressed, pressing down on everything with an unbearable weight. Oliver stood frozen, his small frame caught between the 2 towering figures before him. He didn't understand what was happening, but he could feel it, that invisible, suffocating tension between his mother and the unfamiliar man. Even a child could sense it. Serafina inhaled deeply, forcing steadiness into her voice. She stepped forward, kneeling to Oliver's level, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. It's okay, sweetheart. She smiled softly, even as her heart pounded against her ribs. Why don't you go play in the kitchen for a little while? Oliver blinked, glancing between her and Callum. Who is he? Callum stilled, his entire body locked into place. This was the first time his son, his own flesh and blood, had spoken to him, and the boy had no idea who he was. A dull ache spread through Callum's chest, heavier than he expected. Serafina's fingers squeezed Oliver's shoulder slightly. Her lips held a small smile, but her eyes were sharp with warning. Just a friend of mine, sweetheart. Now go on. Callum's teeth clenched. A friend? That's what he was to her. Oliver nodded, but before he turned, he cast one more glance at Callum. Curious, uncertain. Only when the boy had disappeared behind the kitchen doors did Serafina finally stand, and the fragile mask of warmth slipped away. Don't ever do that in front of my son again. Her voice was quiet, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. Our son, Callum corrected instantly. Serafina let out a sharp laugh, but it was bitter, not amused. Don't say that like you've been here all along. She folded her arms, her eyes burning with 5 years' worth of anger. You have no right to call him that. Callum's eyes narrowed. No right? I am his father. And Serafina stepped forward, her voice cutting. Does that mean you get to walk into our lives and demand a place in it? You think just because you're rich, because you're powerful, you can have anything you want? Callum's jaw tightened. He's my son. You had no right to keep him from me. The word struck like a match against dry kindling. Serafina's eyes darkened, her voice trembling, not with fear, but with rage. I had no right. She laughed, but it was hollow, laced with a bitterness so deep it was almost painful. And what about me, Callum? What rights did I have when you walked away without a word? What rights did I have when I found out I was pregnant and the one person who should have known, asterisk, who should have been there, was gone? Callum opened his mouth, but Serafina wasn't done. Do you have any idea what I went through? Do you know what it's like to sit alone in a doctor's office, staring at an ultrasound screen, with no one beside you? Do you know what it felt like to hear our son's heartbeat for the first time? Asterisk, to realize I was going to be a mother, and have no one to share that moment with. Callum inhaled sharply. Serafina, I didn't know. Exactly. Her voice was ice cold. You didn't know, because you never cared enough to stay. Her words hit like a fist to his chest. Because she was right. He hadn't been there. He hadn't known. But that didn't mean he was going to let this go. Callum's fist tightened, his voice low and unwavering. I won't deny what you went through, but you don't get to use it as an excuse to erase me from his life. Serafina's eyes flashed. You think this is about revenge? You think I kept him from you just to hurt you? This isn't about you, Callum. This is about Oliver. About what's best for him. Callum took a step closer, closing the space between them. And you think what's best is keeping him from his own father? Serafina lifted her chin, refusing to back down. I think what's best is keeping him from a man who only shows up when it's convenient for him. Callum's expression darkened. I'm not walking away this time. And what are you going to do about it? Serafina's voice was sharp, her nails digging into her palms. Take him away from me? Use your money to fight me in court? You think you can win? Callum leaned in slightly, his voice a low, steady promise. I don't need to take him from you. His eyes burned with an intensity she had never seen before. I'll make sure he knows exactly who I am. Serafina's hands clenched so tightly she could feel her nails biting into her skin. I won't let you drag him into your world. The world where everything has a price. Callum's voice was like steel. And I won't let you raise him to believe he doesn't have a father. They stood there, inches apart, two unmovable forces crashing into each other. A mother who had given up everything to protect her son from the one man who had broken her heart. And a father who had lost 5 years and refused to lose another second. Neither willing to back down, neither willing to lose. But then, a small voice cut through the storm. Mommy, what's going on? Silence. The battle between them came to an abrupt halt. Serafina turned, her breath catching in her throat. Oliver stood at the edge of the kitchen, his small face creased with confusion, his round gray eyes darting between them. And for the first time, Callum didn't see a stranger. He saw his son. If you were Serafina, would you forgive Callum? Comment your thoughts below. There were no winners in Callum and Serafina's confrontation. Both walked away from that diner carrying a weight too heavy to bear, one burdened by the pain of the past, the other by the determination to change the future. But Callum Hawthorne was not a man who gave up easily. If Serafina wouldn't let him into Oliver's life right away, he would find another way. And the only way to understand his son was to see him in the world he belonged to, a world Callum had never been a part of for the past 5 years. The next day, Callum Hawthorne stood outside Oliver's elementary school, silent, watching the child who carried his blood. Callum Hawthorne was not a man accustomed to waiting. His entire life, he had been the one to act, to make the decisions, to control every outcome. But now, all he could do was stand there, hands shoved deep in the pockets of his coat, and observe a boy he should have known, but didn't. Oliver. The name had echoed through his mind all night, keeping him awake, weighing on him in a way he wasn't used to. He had read the DNA test results over and over again, not because he doubted them, but because he still couldn't quite believe it. He had a son, and now that boy was right in front of him. Callum stood outside St. Clair's Elementary, a small private school in a quiet Oakland neighborhood. It wasn't the kind of place where wealthy heirs were raised, but it was good. A school where parents fought to give their children a decent education. No one paid attention to him. Here, he was just another stranger in a long coat, standing beneath a tree, watching from a distance. His eyes scanned the playground, filtering through the sound of children's laughter, searching, until he found him. Oliver Ellis. Callum wasn't sure what he had expected. A sudden shock? A moment of clarity? But all he felt was a slow, suffocating tightness in his chest. Oliver was running around the playground, laughing, chasing his friends in a game of tag. He wore a navy sweater and a pair of simple jeans, his small sneakers dusted with playground dirt. His soft brown hair bounced as he moved, and that smile, Callum swallowed hard, an unfamiliar emotion curling in his throat. This was his son, and yet, the boy was completely carefree, untouched by the absence of a father he had never known. And that thought made something ache deep inside Callum's chest. He had always believed himself to be strong, unshakable, but standing here, watching Oliver play, watching his son smile, Callum realized there was a part of his life he had lost, a part that no amount of money could ever buy back. 5 years. 5 years of firsts. Who had taught Oliver to tie his shoes? Who had held him when he was scared? Who had been there when he was sick, when he cried, when he needed someone to tell him everything would be okay? Not him. Callum clenched his fists inside his coat pockets. He had once believed money could fix anything. But standing here now, he knew no amount of wealth could turn back time. From this distance, he could hear Oliver's laughter. The sound hit him harder than he expected. The boy wasn't missing a father. So did Callum even matter? Did he still have a place in his son's life? For the first time in his life, Callum wasn't sure of something, and that terrified him more than anything he had ever faced in the business world. Callum had never thought that watching a child play could make him feel so much. At first, he had simply observed Oliver with curiosity, a child who carried his blood, a truth that couldn't be denied. But the longer he watched, the more he realized this wasn't just a boy who shared his DNA. This was his son. The realization hit him like a tidal wave, crashing over everything else in his mind, sweeping away any lingering detachment he had tried to hold on to. Callum had imagined countless scenarios about confronting Serafina, about forcing her to acknowledge the truth, about winning this fight. He had planned for it, steeled himself for it. But he had never prepared for the moment when he would truly see Oliver. Not as a stranger, not as a name on a test result, but as his child. And it took the breath right out of him. He couldn't look away. Oliver ran, laughing, tripping slightly before catching himself. He brushed his hands against his jeans, unfazed, and kept going as if nothing had happened. Resilient, determined, unshaken, just like him. But then, something else struck Callum. Something that made his chest tighten painfully. Every time Oliver fell, he got back up on his own. No one rushed over to help him. No one dusted off his scraped knees or told him it was okay. Callum didn't know whether to be proud of his son's strength or devastated by it. Oliver had learned to be strong without him. A dull ache spread through Callum's chest, deep and unrelenting. A regret that settled into his very bones. He should have been there. He should have been the one to hold Oliver's hand when he stumbled, to tell him it was okay to fall, because he could always try again. But he wasn't. For the past 5 years, Callum had been consumed by billion-dollar deals, by boardroom battles, by the world he had chosen. And he had never once stopped to think that there was another world, just as real, just as important. A world where a little boy had grown up never knowing he had a father. Because that father hadn't been there. Callum's fists clenched inside his coat pockets, his jaw tightening. Why? Why hadn't Serafina told him? Why had she decided that he didn't deserve to know? And the worst question of all, the one that made his stomach drop. If he had known back then, would he have stayed? The thought made him go still. He wanted to believe he would have. He wanted to believe that he would have been the man Serafina and Oliver had needed him to be. But was that the truth? Would Callum Hawthorne, 5 years ago, have been ready to walk away from his empire, from the life he had spent years building, for a child he hadn't planned for? He wasn't sure. And that truth, The possibility that maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't have been ready back then felt like a crushing weight pressing down on his chest. Oliver's laughter rang through the air, clear and bright. Callum watched his son, and for the first time in his life, he was afraid. Afraid that he had already lost too much time. Afraid that he would never get back what had been taken from him. Afraid that Oliver didn't need him. Because for 5 years, his son had lived without him and had been just fine. For the first time, Callum saw something that money could never buy back. 5 years. A debt no contract could ever repay. He had spent his whole life believing that everything could be controlled until this moment. And now, Callum Hawthorne, the powerful, untouchable man who had never lost his composure, stood there, fists clenched at his sides, staring at his son with the eyes of a father. For the first time, and it hurt like hell. Callum wasn't sure how long it took him to gather the courage to step forward. Normally, hesitation wasn't in his nature. In business, he made decisions in seconds. No doubt, no second guessing. But now, standing here, looking at the little boy sitting in the grass, a strange uncertainty crept into his chest. And that terrified him more than anything else ever had. He had never had to think about what to say first. But this wasn't a business partner. This wasn't an employee. This was his son. And Oliver had no idea who he was. But no matter how much fear gnawed at him, Callum knew he couldn't just stand there forever. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward. Oliver sensed Callum's presence before he even spoke. The boy was crouched in the grass, carefully arranging small stones into a shape that only he seemed to understand. But the moment a large shadow fell over him, Oliver's head snapped up. Wide gray eyes met Callum's. The boy didn't say a word, but Callum could feel the guardedness in his gaze. Oliver shifted slightly, inching away, his small fingers gripping a stone as if he were instinctively protecting whatever he was building. Callum should have expected this. Oliver didn't know him. To the boy, he was just a stranger, a man he had never seen before suddenly standing too close. And that realization hurt. For the first time, Callum truly felt the distance between them, but he wouldn't let it stop him. So, slowly, he lowered himself into a crouch, keeping his posture open, careful not to loom over the boy. He kept his voice light. "What are you building?" Oliver kept watching him warily, but this time his brows knitted together, evaluating. He hesitated, then finally answered, voice small but firm. "A spaceship." It wasn't much, just a few scattered stones arranged in a pattern only he could see. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that Oliver saw it. Callum glanced at the stones, then nodded as if it were the most impressive thing he had ever seen. "Looks pretty cool." Oliver didn't respond immediately. His head tilted slightly, still assessing, still wary. A few beats of silence passed. Then, perhaps deciding that the man in front of him wasn't a threat, Oliver relaxed just a little. He turned back to his creation, his shoulders losing a fraction of their stiffness. Callum took that as a good sign. Keeping his tone casual, he asked, "What's your favorite thing?" Oliver stilled for just a second, as if caught off guard by the question. Then, for the first time, his eyes brightened slightly. "Lego." Just one simple word, but Callum heard the flicker of excitement in it. It was the first time Oliver had answered not out of politeness or caution, but because he wanted to. Something warm stirred in Callum's chest. This was the first crack in the wall between them. Keeping his voice steady, he asked, "Lego, huh? What do you like building the most?" This time, Oliver didn't hesitate. His eyes lit up as he said, "Everything. Cities, battleships, robots. But spaceships are my favorite." Callum watched his son, and for the first time, he felt it. A connection. Small, fragile, but real. No grand speeches. No forced explanations about the past. Just a simple conversation. Just listening. He had never done this before. Never had to. But right now, he wanted to. Oliver kept talking, his initial hesitation slowly fading. He told Callum about his favorite Lego sets, about a new spaceship model he really wanted. And Callum just sat there listening. He couldn't remember the last time he had truly listened to someone without an agenda. Not to find a weakness, not to gain an advantage, but simply to understand his son. And as Oliver kept talking, No longer watching Callum with cautious eyes, the realization hit him. For the first time, he wasn't just a stranger standing at a distance. He was taking his first steps toward being a father. Serafina Ellis didn't lose her temper easily. She had spent years learning how to control her emotions, learning how to swallow her pain, to push back the tears, to never let her son see her as anything other than strong. But when she stepped out of the school gates and saw what was in front of her, a rage unlike anything she had ever felt exploded inside her. Callum Hawthorne, the man who had disappeared from her life 5 years ago, was now sitting beside her son. He said something to Oliver, and the boy laughed. A bright, carefree laugh, as if Callum wasn't a stranger, as if he had any right to be there. Serafina's body locked up, her heartbeat pounding in her chest. No, she couldn't let this happen. Her steps quickened, anger rising in every part of her, her blood roaring with alarm. Callum had no place in Oliver's world. Not now, not ever. Oliver was the first to notice her. The boy turned at the sound of her hurried footsteps, his gray eyes lighting up as he smiled. "Mommy," he called out, his voice innocent, oblivious, as if nothing was wrong, as if he had just had a perfectly normal conversation. But Serafina didn't look at Oliver. She only looked at Callum. Her eyes were sharp as a blade. "What the hell are you doing here?" Her voice was low, dangerous, every word laced with ice. Callum rose to his feet, unshaken. He had known this moment was coming. He had known she would find him. But when he saw the fire in her eyes, the absolute fury, the fear hidden beneath it, he realized just how hard she was willing to fight to keep him out of Oliver's life. His voice remained steady. "I was just talking to my son." Serafina's hands fisted at her sides, her entire body trembling with rage. "My son," she spat, emphasizing each word. "You don't get to call him that." Callum didn't flinch. "He's my son too, Serafina. You can't erase that." Her eyes darkened. She didn't need to argue that. The DNA test had already said it all. But that didn't mean Callum had a right to walk in and turn their lives upside down. He didn't get to just show up and pretend the last 5 years hadn't happened. Her pulse thundered in her ears, adrenaline surging as she reached for Oliver's wrist. "We're leaving." She pulled the boy to his feet, but Oliver hesitated, his small face scrunched in confusion. "But Mommy?" "We're leaving, Oliver." Her voice was sharp, allowing no room for argument. She didn't look at Callum again. She wouldn't give him the chance to say anything else. But Callum wasn't the kind of man to be ignored. "Serafina," just his voice, low, firm, made her pause. She turned, fury flashing in her eyes. "I warned you, Callum. Stay away from my son." Callum's fists clenched at his sides, but his voice remained calm. "Don't try to erase me from his life." Serafina let out a hollow laugh. "Erase you? Callum, you erased yourself 5 years ago. You made your choice." She took a deep breath, then turned her back on him, pulling Oliver toward the school doors. Callum didn't follow. He just watched as his son, was led away from him. Watched as Oliver glanced back, gray eyes filled with confusion, questions Callum wanted to answer but couldn't. And in that moment, Callum knew this was only the beginning. Love emotionally intense stories like this? Hit subscribe now so you don't miss the next episodes. Callum stood still, watching as Serafina and Oliver disappeared beyond the school gates. She could pull their son away, she could try to shut him out of the boy's life, but that didn't mean he would stop. He wouldn't stop. Serafina could refuse to talk to him, but there was one truth she couldn't deny. Oliver was his son, and if she wouldn't let him into their child's life as his father, then he would find another way. The next day, Callum walked into a small cafe he knew Serafina frequented. This time, he wasn't here to fight. He came with an offer, one he was certain she wouldn't be able to refuse. Serafina knew Callum wouldn't back down easily. She had known him too well for too long. He was a man who never accepted failure, a man who always got what he wanted, at any cost. And she had been right, because when she stepped into the cafe that afternoon, she wasn't surprised to see him sitting there, waiting for her. He had chosen a corner seat, where the soft afternoon light cast sharp shadows over his features. the same sharpness she had once traced with her fingertips. The tailored suit was as impeccable as ever, but this wasn't the Callum Hawthorne who dominated boardrooms. This was a man trying to reclaim something he had lost. And Serafina knew. She was the only thing standing between him and Oliver. She inhaled deeply, gripping the strap of her bag before forcing herself to walk toward him. She pulled out a chair and sat across from him, not bothering to hide her irritation. "Don't you have anything better to do than follow me around?" Callum didn't react to the bite in her tone. He just studied her, as if carefully choosing his words. "We need to talk." Serafina let out a dry laugh. "We have nothing to talk about." Callum sighed, but didn't argue. Instead, he reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a check. Serafina glanced at it, her breath hitching at the number written across the paper. $500,000. A chill spread through her chest. Her fingers curled slightly. "What is this?" Callum slid the check toward her. "It's for you. For Oliver." Serafina didn't move. A slow, burning anger clawed its way up her spine. She lifted her gaze, her eyes sharp as glass. "You think I need your money?" Callum didn't flinch. "You can hate me all you want, but don't let your pride get in the way of what Oliver deserves. I know where you live, Serafina. I know you're working 2 jobs just to get by. Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" Serafina's jaw tightened. "So what? This is my life. I don't need your money to survive. But Oliver does." Callum's voice was steady, unwavering. "He deserves better. You can turn me away all you want, but don't turn down a chance for him." Serafina let out a cold, bitter laugh. Slowly, she reached for the check, her fingertips brushing over the numbers. $500,000. Enough to change her life. Enough to give Oliver everything she had struggled to provide. But it couldn't change the past. It couldn't erase the nights she had stayed awake with a crying baby alone. It couldn't erase the sacrifices, the exhaustion, the years of fighting, surviving, carrying everything on her own. And now, Callum thought a check could make up for it? Her fingers tightened around the paper. Then, without hesitation, rip, she tore the check in half. White fragments fluttered down onto the table. Callum stilled, his face unreadable. But his eyes never wavered. Serafina leaned back in her chair, arms crossed over her chest. "I'm not for sale, Callum. You think money can fix everything, but there are things it will never be able to buy." Her voice was like a blade, cutting straight through the tension between them. "And a child's love is one of them." The shredded check lay scattered across the table, the torn pieces still trembling slightly with the force of Serafina's unsteady breath. But she didn't look at them. Her eyes were locked on Callum. "Don't ever do that again." Her voice wasn't loud, but every word was razor sharp, slicing through the air between them. Callum leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable, as if her reaction hadn't fazed him at all. But Serafina wasn't fooled. She saw the way his jaw tightened just slightly, the way his fingers clenched against the edge of the table. He was holding back his anger, but that wasn't her problem. Callum gave a slow nod, his voice low and measured. "Fine. If you don't want my money, I won't force you. But be realistic, Serafina. Do you really think you can do this alone forever?" Serafina planted both hands on the table, leaning in. "You don't get to say that." Her voice was steel, her darkened eyes a warning. Asterisk, asterisk. I've been raising Oliver on my own for 5 years. And guess what? He's fine. He's happy. Without you. He might be fine, but he could have so much more. Callum shot back without hesitation. "And you know that." Serafina let out a sharp, cold laugh. "Oh, and what exactly do you think would make his life better? Money? A bigger house? A fancy private school?" She shook her head, fire burning in her gaze. "You don't get it, Callum. Oliver doesn't need your money. He needs a father." The room fell into silence. For the first time in their conversation, Callum didn't have an immediate response. Serafina saw the way he froze for just a second. A flicker of something raw, something vulnerable, passed through his expression. She had struck a nerve. Callum had power. He had influence, but he didn't have Oliver. He didn't know what it meant to be a father. Callum inhaled slowly, his voice dropping an octave. "I want to be his father. Serafina's jaw tightened. Her voice dripped with bitterness. Too late, Callum. You lost that chance 5 years ago. Callum pressed his palms against the table, leaning forward, closing the space between them. I'm still his father. That will never change. A slow fire ignited in Serafina's chest. Do you even know what being a father means? Her voice was sharp, unwavering. Asterisk, asterisk, it's not just DNA. It's not just a name on a birth certificate. Being a father is staying up all night when your child has a fever. It's holding them after a nightmare, telling them they're safe. It's sacrificing for them, choosing them, every single day, no matter what it costs you. Her breath shuddered, but her voice didn't waver. Did you ever do any of that, Callum? Callum stilled. Serafina met his gaze head on, daring him to answer. Or did you only remember he existed now that he's old enough to not need you anymore? The words hit like a fist to his chest. She saw the slight flicker of pain in his eyes. But just as quickly, Callum straightened, regaining his composure. His voice was lower now, almost dangerous. Whether you like it or not, I will do whatever it takes to be in my son's life. Serafina's fists clenched at her sides. You think this is a battle? She let out a cold, humorless laugh. You think you can fight for Oliver the way you fight for your business deals? Let me tell you something, Callum. Her voice sharpened into a blade. A child's love isn't something you can win, and I will not let you drag my son into your cold, ruthless world. She grabbed her purse, standing abruptly, ready to walk away. But before she could move, Callum spoke, and this time his voice was different. Not sharp, not demanding, but something else entirely. I don't want to drag Oliver into my world, Serafina. There was something almost broken in the way he said it. I just want to be a part of his. Serafina froze. For the first time since their conversation began, he wasn't speaking as the arrogant billionaire who thought he could fix everything with a check. He was speaking as a man who was truly afraid of losing his son. Slowly, she turned back, and for the first time, her fury faded. All that was left was exhaustion, sadness, regret. It's too late, Callum. Her voice softened, but remained firm. You don't get to just walk into Oliver's life and pretend nothing happened. You weren't there for 5 years. I raised him alone. You don't get to show up now and claim the title of father like it's your birthright. She turned toward the door, and this time, she wasn't leaving in anger. She was leaving because she was tired. Callum watched her go, a foreign weight settling in his chest. For the first time in his life, he felt powerless. Because he knew, not everything could be controlled. Not everything could be bought. And more than anything, he couldn't change the past. But if there was one thing Callum Hawthorne understood, it was this. The past couldn't be changed, but the future could, and he would do whatever it took to fight for his son. Serafina took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. She had just ripped Callum's check in half, a statement as clear as any words. She didn't need his money. The air between them was thick with tension, so heavy it felt suffocating. Callum didn't react right away. He simply sat there, silent, watching the shredded remains of his offer drift onto the dark wooden table. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then, slowly he looked up. Gray eyes, sharp as steel, locked onto hers. You can refuse my money, Serafina. His voice was low, steady, controlled. But you can't erase me from Oliver's life. Serafina folded her arms across her chest, her anger still burning. You were never a part of his life, Callum. Her voice was cold. That was your choice. Callum pressed both hands against the table, leaning in slightly. I didn't choose to leave my son. His tone hardened, each word deliberate. I didn't know. Serafina let out a hollow, bitter laugh. Well, now you do. She leaned forward, meeting his gaze head on. So, what are you going to do? Take me to court? Callum didn't blink. If that's the only way I get to be his father, then yes. The words dropped between them like a bomb. Serafina's entire body tensed, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. He would. She could see it in his eyes, in the firm set of his jaw. She knew Callum well enough to understand that when he made a promise, asterisk, asterisk, or a threat, asterisk, asterisk, he followed through. He wasn't a man who made empty declarations. He was a man who acted. But before her fury could erupt again, Callum exhaled, and something in his expression shifted. But I don't want that. His voice dropped lower, losing its hard edge. I don't want to fight you, Serafina. I don't want to rip Oliver's life apart, forcing him to exist between two sides. Serafina's breath caught, her heart pounding against her ribs. Then what do you want, Callum? Callum leaned back in his chair, his shoulders relaxing slightly, but his resolve never wavered. I want to be his father. His voice was quiet but firm, each syllable carrying undeniable weight. I want Oliver to know that he has a father, not just a name on a birth certificate, not just a stranger who showed up 5 years too late. I want to be there for him. I want to do what I should have done from the start. Serafina's fingers curled into fists beneath the table. She didn't want to believe him. She didn't want to believe that Callum truly wanted to be a father, not out of obligation, not out of guilt, but because he wanted Oliver. Because if she let herself believe it, she risked being hurt all over again. But his eyes weren't the eyes of a man just trying to reclaim control. They were the eyes of a man who had just realized exactly what he had lost. You can hate me. Callum's voice was steady, unwavering. But don't let your anger take away Oliver's chance to have a father. For the first time, Serafina didn't know what to say, because deep down, buried beneath years of resentment and pain, there was a part of her that had always wanted Oliver to have a father. But that didn't mean she could just let Callum walk back into their lives as if nothing had happened. Serafina couldn't breathe. This conversation was slipping further away from what she had prepared for. She had walked into this cafe ready to end things, to make Callum understand that he had no place in Oliver's life. But now, sitting across from him, seeing the unwavering determination in his eyes, she knew he wasn't going to give up, and she couldn't keep running forever. Not because of Callum, because of Oliver. Didn't her son have the right to know the truth? But the thought sent a deep, sharp fear through her. What if Callum made Oliver love him, only to leave him behind again? What if her son ended up hurt the same way she had? She couldn't allow that. She needed to control this situation. If Callum truly wanted to be in Oliver's life, it would be on her terms. Serafina took a deep breath, her gaze steely as she met his eyes. I'll let you see Oliver. Callum immediately straightened, a flicker of light flashing through his gray eyes. Serafina, she lifted a hand, cutting him off, but only as a friend. Each word was sharp, deliberate. Asterisk, asterisk, Oliver won't know you're his father. I won't let you turn his life upside down. Not yet. Callum's jaw tightened. How long do you plan to keep this from him? I'm not keeping it from him. Her answer was immediate. I'm protecting him. Callum's fingers tapped against the table, slow and calculated. She could see it, the war going on inside him. He didn't want to be just a friend. He wanted his son. But he also understood that this was his only way in. And Callum was a businessman. He knew how to negotiate. He took a slow breath, then gave a single nod. Fine. His voice dropped lower, firm with resolve. If that's the condition, I'll accept it. Serafina hadn't expected him to agree so quickly. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, but quickly regained her composure. Understand this, Callum. Her voice was steady, her eyes burning with the fierce protectiveness only a mother could have. The second I see you hurt Oliver, even just once, I will never let you near him again. I understand. His response came instantly, and for the first time, Serafina heard something beneath his words. It wasn't fear of losing her. It was fear of losing his son. She swallowed, ignoring the tiny crack of hesitation forming inside her. Good. She pushed back her chair, standing quickly, needing to leave before her emotions could waver any further. But before she could take a step, Callum spoke again. His voice was quiet, but undeniable. I won't hurt him, Serafina. A pause. Then, but you know what's going to happen, don't you? She froze, but she didn't turn back. Oliver will figure it out on his own, Callum continued. Not because I tell him, but because the bond between us is something neither of us can ignore. A shiver ran down Serafina's spine. Her grip on her bag tightened. Without another word, she walked out of the cafe. Callum remained seated, watching her go, knowing this was only the first step. He had an opening, and he wasn't going to waste it. Callum remained seated in the cafe for a while after Serafina left, his eyes still fixed on the door she had walked through. She might have reluctantly agreed to let him see Oliver, but this wasn't acceptance. She still didn't trust him, and maybe he couldn't blame her for that. But no matter how many walls Serafina tried to put up between him and their son, he had secured his first chance. Next time, when he saw Oliver, he couldn't afford to make a mistake. He would not lose his son again. The next day, Callum arrived at San Francisco Park. In his hands was an expensive toy, a limited edition Lego set, the exact one Oliver had mentioned. Today, he would meet his son. Callum had never felt nervous about a meeting before. He had faced some of the most powerful businessmen in the world, walked into high-stakes negotiations where a single misstep could cost billions. But nothing compared to this moment. The moment he would finally meet his son. He couldn't fail. That was why he had prepared carefully. He arrived early, picking a bench with a clear view of the playground. His grip tightened around the paper bag holding the Lego set, the spaceship Oliver had wanted. It wasn't available in any store. He had his assistant track one down, even ordering it from Europe just to get in time. The perfect gift, a way to bridge the distance. Callum didn't know how long he had been sitting there when he heard it. A small voice in the distance. "Mommy, hurry up." His head snapped up, and his chest tightened. Oliver was running toward him. For the first time, Callum saw his son coming to him. Not by accident, not because he had been caught off guard, but because he was here to see him. Serafina followed behind at a slower pace, her expression as guarded as ever. She stopped at a distance, giving Oliver space. But Callum knew she was watching his every move. Oliver stopped in front of him, his gray eyes full of curiosity. Callum exhaled slowly. Right now, he wasn't a CEO. He wasn't a powerful man. He was just a father trying to meet his son. He crouched down to Oliver's level and gave a small, careful smile. "Hi, Oliver." The boy tilted his head slightly, as if studying him. Callum didn't rush. He let Oliver take his time. After a moment's hesitation, Oliver gave a small nod. "Hi, mister." Two simple words, but to Callum, they meant everything. He gently placed the paper bag on the bench beside him. "I brought you a gift." For a brief second, Oliver's eyes lit up, but then, just as quickly, his excitement faded. He glanced toward his mother. Serafina remained silent, arms crossed, but she didn't stop him. Seeing this, Oliver slowly reached out, taking the bag. He opened it, and his eyes widened. The Lego spaceship. His voice was filled with surprise. Callum felt a quiet sense of relief. Maybe this was a good start. But then, Oliver did something unexpected. He didn't immediately rip open the box or start building, the way Callum had imagined. Instead, Oliver stared at the toy for a long moment, then carefully set it down beside him. "Thank you, mister." His voice was polite, respectful, but not excited. Callum's brow furrowed slightly. "You don't like it?" Oliver shook his head. "I do." Then, without another word, he turned away and ran toward a nearby tree, where he had placed a small pile of rocks. Callum watched, confused. Oliver had set the expensive toy aside to play with stones he had picked up from the ground. He didn't understand. He had expected something different. A wide smile, excitement, maybe even a moment of pure joy. But Oliver hadn't reacted that way. And for the first time, a quiet thought crept into Callum's mind. Had Oliver grown up in a world too different from his own? Callum had never encountered a situation like this. For years, extravagant gifts had been the fastest way to earn favor, whether with business partners, employees, or the countless women who had passed through his life. Money, presents, expensive things, they always worked. But with Oliver, they meant nothing. The boy remained crouched under the tree, completely absorbed in the small pile of stones he had collected. In his tiny hands, he turned over a deep blue rock, studying it as if he were examining something truly important. Callum glanced down at the Lego set still sitting on the bench, a toy any child would normally be thrilled to receive. But Oliver had barely spared a glance. Suppressing the unfamiliar feeling of confusion tightening in his chest, Callum slowly stepped forward. He lowered himself onto the ground beside Oliver, watching as the boy carefully picked up a gray stone and placed it next to the blue one. "What are you doing?" Callum asked. Oliver didn't look up. He picked up another stone, turned it over in his palm, then set it back down. I'm looking for the perfect rock. His voice was calm, as if this were the most serious task in the world. Callum raised an eyebrow. The perfect rock. Oliver nodded, selecting another one, examining it with quiet focus. I'm building a mountain, he explained, but I need the right piece for the peak. Callum looked down at the tiny arrangement of rocks spread out in front of Oliver. Some had already been stacked into the shape of a miniature mountain. Oliver was playing with random stones he had picked up from the ground, while the $100 toy sat untouched nearby. Callum wasn't sure how to process it. But you could build a mountain with the Lego set I gave you, he suggested, trying to steer Oliver towards something he assumed was better. Finally, Oliver looked up. For the first time, those gray eyes, so eerily identical to Callum's own, stared straight at him. The boy was silent for a moment, as if carefully considering the question. Then, he simply shook his head. No, Lego isn't real. Callum froze. Lego isn't real? That thought had never even crossed his mind. To him, Lego was the ultimate creative toy, something a child could use to build anything their imagination could dream of. But to Oliver, these simple, rough stones meant more than an expensive toy ever could. Callum sat there, unmoving, and for the first time in his life, he realized money wasn't the key to everything. Not with Oliver. His son had grown up in a world far different from the one Callum knew. Oliver didn't need expensive toys. He didn't care about luxury. He just needed someone who truly understood the world he lived in. And Callum was beginning to understand. This was a world he had never been a part of. For years, Callum had lived in his own reality, one where his decisions could shake financial markets, where money and power could buy nearly anything. But here, in a small park in San Francisco, all Oliver needed were a few stones to build a tiny mountain. A world so simple, so pure, that Callum had never even considered it. And the most unsettling part? He had no idea how to step into it. Callum had never been caught off guard by a question before. He was used to high-stakes meetings where a single word could shift stock values. He had sat through grueling negotiations where even the smallest misstep could cost billions. He had faced the toughest questions, from rivals in the business world, from the media, from those who would love nothing more than to expose his weaknesses. But never had he faced a question that left him without an immediate answer. And it came from a 5-year-old, from his son. Callum was still sitting beside Oliver, watching as the boy carefully arranged small stones into a miniature mountain. Oliver tilted his head, narrowing his eyes in deep concentration, measuring each placement as if the fate of the world depended on it. Then, without warning, Oliver looked up and asked, "Do you have any other sons?" Callum froze. For a moment, everything around him ceased to exist. The rustling of leaves, the distant laughter of children in the park, even his own breath. Everything stopped. He looked down at Oliver, the boy waiting patiently for an answer, gray eyes shimmering under the afternoon light. Eyes that looked just like his. Oliver hadn't asked this randomly. It wasn't just childish curiosity about Callum's life. He had asked for a reason, a simple but brutal one. Oliver wanted to know if he mattered. Was he just one of many? Just another child in Callum's world, one of several sons scattered across a life of wealth and power? Callum inhaled deeply, but it did nothing to clear the knot tightening in his chest. Should he lie? Tell Oliver, "No, you're my only child." But that wouldn't be the truth. Callum had no other sons, but not because he had chosen it that way. He had never thought about having a family, never imagined himself as a father. And that was what made Oliver's question cut even deeper. Because Callum knew, if Serafina had never told him the truth, he never would have known. He could have lived his entire life without knowing he had a son. And now, that child sat before him, waiting for an answer. Callum swallowed hard, then slowly shook his head. "No, I don't have any other sons." Oliver studied him for a long moment, as if measuring the truth in his words. Then, finally, he gave a small nod, accepting the answer, and turned back to his stones. But Callum couldn't let it end there. He couldn't let this question pass as if it were nothing. He took a slow breath and spoke again, his voice lower, quieter, for the first time, completely honest. "But if I did, they wouldn't be as important as you." Oliver looked up again, blinking. "Why?" Callum held his gaze. A part of him wanted to say everything. Because you are my son. Because I've already lost too much time. Because I won't let that happen again. But he couldn't. Serafina had set the rules. He could only be a friend. He couldn't say the words Oliver wasn't ready to hear. So instead, he simply smiled. Because you're special. Oliver studied him for a long moment, as if weighing those words. Then, slowly he smiled. A small smile. But the first one Callum had truly earned. And for the first time, Callum felt something warm bloom in his chest. Maybe, just maybe, he hadn't completely failed. Callum is caught between two choices, his company or his son. What do you think he will choose? Callum left the park with an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. The meeting with Oliver hadn't been perfect. His son hadn't run into his arms, hadn't instantly accepted him. But still, it was a start. Oliver had smiled at him, spoken to him. It wasn't much, but it was something. And Callum had no idea that the moment he finally set foot in Oliver's world, his own world would begin to crumble. Less than 24 hours later, his name was plastered across financial and entertainment headlines. Callum Hawthorne, CEO of Sterling Technologies, exposed for having a secret son. The news spread like wildfire. And this time, Callum knew he couldn't just stand by and watch. The moment he walked into Sterling Technologies the next morning, he could feel the shift in the air. From the reception desk to the elevators, from the bustling hallways to the executive boardroom. Everything was quieter than usual, but not the silence of focus and productivity. It was the silence of hushed whispers and conversations cut short the second he passed. It was the silence of speculation. Callum didn't need to ask to know what had happened, and he didn't have to wait long to confirm it. The moment he stepped into his office, his assistant, Madeline, was already there, waiting. She was rarely flustered, but now, she clutched her iPad a little too tightly, her expression tense. Mr. Hawthorne, you need to see this. Without another word, she turned the screen toward him. Callum looked down, and everything inside him froze. On the screen, the front page of the Financial Times. A headline, bold and unmissable, struck him like a punch to the chest. Callum Hawthorne, CEO of Sterling Technologies, secret child revealed. Right beneath it, a photo of him and Oliver in the park. A moment that should have been nothing but a quiet, personal exchange, now twisted into a scandalous expose. Callum's jaw clenched. His entire body went rigid. But that wasn't all. Madeline scrolled further, revealing a flood of headlines from every major outlet. The reclusive billionaire and his illegitimate son. How long has Callum Hawthorne been hiding this? The New York Times. Who is the mystery woman? Unraveling the secrets behind the child's mother. Forbes. Will Sterling Technologies survive its CEO's personal scandal? Bloomberg. Callum's fingers curled into fists. He couldn't believe how fast this had escalated. Just yesterday, he had been trying to quietly build a connection with his son. Now the entire world knew. Where did this leak come from? He demanded, his voice dangerously low. Madeline shook her head. We're still investigating, but it looks like a paparazzo snapped a picture of you and Oliver at the park. The rumors started circulating on gossip sites before the major outlets picked it up. Callum inhaled sharply, forcing himself to stay calm. The press, the media, once again, they had turned his life into a spectacle. But this time, they weren't just after him. They were after Oliver. And that was something he would not tolerate. He turned to Madeline, his voice razor sharp. Shut this down. Now. Madeline nodded, but hesitation flickered in her eyes. The problem is, the story has already spread too far. We can control the media response, but a sharp ding interrupted her. Callum glanced at his phone. A message from the chairman of Sterling Technologies. Meeting. Immediately. Callum shut his eyes for half a second. He should have seen this coming. The board wouldn't let this slide. And that meant the real battle had just begun. The boardroom on the top floor of Sterling Technologies had never been this tense. A long, polished ebony table stretched across the room, surrounded by the most powerful men and women in the company. People who had built their careers on prioritizing profit above all else. And right now, Callum Hawthorne was at the center of their fury. Cold, scrutinizing eyes bore into him, some filled with concern, others with outright condemnation. At the head of the table, Richard Langley, chairman of the board, his silver hair doing nothing to diminish the sharp, dangerous aura around him, tapped his fingers lightly against the table surface. Silence stretched for a few more seconds before he spoke, cutting straight to the point. "What are you going to do about this, Callum?" Callum sat back in his chair, perfectly composed. "What do you mean?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Richard's expression remained unreadable as he leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms. "Don't play dumb. The media is running wild with rumors that you have a secret son. The shareholders are panicking. Our stock has already dropped 2% this morning." Another board member, James Whitmore, the company's CFO, leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "If you don't deny it immediately, that number will get worse." Callum remained silent, watching them all. They didn't care about the truth. No one in this room had asked if the child was actually his. They only cared about the stock price. A slow, bitter smirk curved Callum's lips. "And what happens if I deny it?" "The story dies." Richard responded instantly. "The press moves on to the next scandal. The shareholders calm down. The company remains unaffected." Callum's gaze darkened. "So you want me to lie?" Silence rippled through the room like a slow-building storm. A few executives averted their gazes. Others held their ground. "No one's asking you to lie," James said carefully, his voice smooth, calculated. "Just not confirm anything." "Ah," Callum let out a dry chuckle. "So a lie by omission, then?" "Callum," Richard sighed, like a father speaking to a reckless son. "You cannot let personal matters interfere with the company. Sterling Technologies is bigger than you. It belongs to thousands of shareholders, tens of thousands of employees. A scandal like this could wipe billions off our market value." Callum's fingers curled slightly against the smooth surface of the table. He didn't respond, because he knew they weren't wrong. In the world he had built, image was everything. A CEO with a spotless reputation. No scandals, no complications. That was what investors wanted. A CEO with a child out of wedlock? That was a liability. Richard's voice turned even sharper, heavier. "If you don't deny this now, the board will have to reconsider your ability to lead this company." Callum went rigid. There it was, a direct threat. They were telling him, fall in line or risk losing everything. His gaze swept across the room. These people who had once praised him, who had once treated him like an untouchable force in the business world, were now looking at him as something expendable. All because of one child. His child. Callum exhaled slowly, then looked up. When he spoke, his voice was steel. "You're asking me to choose between my company and my son." Richard didn't flinch. "Yes." A long, weighted silence filled the air. Then Callum laughed. Not a laugh of amusement. A sharp, cold, dangerous laugh. He placed both hands on the table, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a low, unwavering command. "Listen carefully." His eyes burned with unshakable determination. "I don't have to choose." The room went utterly still. Every pair of eyes locked onto him. And then Callum delivered the final blow. "I will have both." Callum's declaration landed like a hammer striking a slab of marble. No one spoke. No one moved. The only thing filling the room was the heavy weight of silence, punctuated by the sharp gazes locked onto him. Some stunned, some wary, and others filled with doubt. Richard Langley blinked. Just once. But in the world of high-stakes business, that single hesitation spoke volumes. He hadn't expected this answer. Callum felt the subtle shift in the air, the flicker of uncertainty rippling through the room. But he didn't stop. Bracing both hands on the table, he leveled his gaze at the faces before him, his steel-gray eyes burning with an intensity that no one could ignore. "You're all forgetting something." His voice was low, deliberate, each word slicing through the air like a finely honed blade. "Not a single one of you has the right to dictate my personal life." James Whitmore, the CFO, frowned. "Callum, we're not asking you to change your personal life. But Sterling Technologies is a multi-billion-dollar corporation. The shareholders have every right to be concerned if what? Callum cut him off, his voice sharp as glass. If their CEO has a child? James hesitated. Or if their CEO doesn't fit the image they expect? Callum pressed, his gaze sweeping over the room like a storm brewing on the horizon. He saw it then, the flickers of doubt in a few of their eyes. Good. They thought they could corner him. They thought they could force him to choose. They forgot who Callum Hawthorne was. Straightening, he adjusted the cuff of his sleeve, his tone shifting, not tense, not angry, but infused with absolute certainty. You say this news will tank our stock. He arched a brow. Let me remind you of something. Sterling Technologies isn't successful because I don't have a child. It's successful because I built it. His gaze locked onto Richard Langley. And that hasn't changed. Richard crossed his arms, unreadable. But Callum wasn't finished. And if this board truly believes I'm unfit to lead because I have a son, Callum continued, a sharp smirk ghosting across his lips, then I can walk out that door right now. But know this, if I leave, Sterling Technologies goes down with me. A suffocating silence blanketed the room. No one dared to challenge him, because no one could. Callum was irreplaceable. He was the one who had taken Sterling Technologies from a mid-tier tech company to a billion-dollar empire. Without him, Sterling Technologies wouldn't just stumble. It would crumble. And Richard Langley knew that better than anyone. The older man clenched his jaw, his fingers tightening over the edge of the table. But when he finally spoke, his tone was laced with reluctant acceptance. Then tell me, Callum, what do you plan to do about this? Callum lowered himself back into his chair, a cool, unshaken smirk playing on his lips. Nothing. James Whitmore blinked. Nothing. That's right. Callum nodded. I won't deny it. I won't confirm it. I don't need to. Leaning back, he exuded the effortless dominance of a man who knew he had already won. Let them talk. Let them speculate. Let them write whatever stories they want. He tapped 2 fingers against the table, his next words slow, deliberate, and unshakable. And when they're done talking, I will stand before the world and announce that I am Oliver's father. Silence crashed over the room like a tidal wave. Richard blinked again. A few board members stared, mouths slightly open. James Whitmore exhaled heavily, his shoulders sagging in quiet resignation, as if he had just realized this battle was over. Callum Hawthorne had made his decision, and nothing would change his mind. The news about Callum was no longer confined to financial reports and corporate forums. Now it was everywhere. Tabloids, social media, morning talk shows. His name was plastered across every screen, every headline. Callum Hawthorne has a secret child. His face appeared alongside wild speculations about the identity of the child's mother, theories about why he had kept it hidden for years. Paparazzi photos of him and Oliver at the park were blown out of proportion, paired with misleading captions that fed the public's curiosity. And as expected, Serafina became the next target. She realized at the moment she stepped outside her apartment the next morning. The stares from neighbors, the hushed whispers, the questions disguised as casual conversation, the judgmental glances that had never existed before. It terrified her. She had spent 5 years shielding Oliver from Callum's world, a world of power, wealth, and ruthless scrutiny. And now, that door had been blown wide open. Serafina knew she had to make a decision. Was it time to leave? Should she take Oliver far away before things spiraled even further out of control? For 5 years, she had believed she could control everything. She had built a small, safe world for Oliver, one without Callum Hawthorne, without prying eyes, without the weight of fame and fortune pressing down on them. But overnight, everything had changed. She felt at the moment she stepped out of her Oakland apartment. The first set of eyes she met belonged to her downstairs neighbor, a sweet older woman who usually greeted her with a warm smile every morning. But today, there was no smile. Instead, there was curiosity, intrigue, and something else, pity. Serafina didn't slow down. She pulled her coat tighter around herself, gripped Oliver's hand firmly, and walked toward the parking lot. But then, Ms. Ellis, do you have any comment on the news? She froze. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Turning her head slowly, she spotted a man across the street, a reporter, camera in hand, eyes gleaming with excitement at his discovery. "Can you confirm that Callum Hawthorne is the father of your son?" Oliver's small fingers tightened around hers. He didn't understand what was happening, but he could sense the tension radiating from her. Serafina spun around and walked faster, practically dragging Oliver toward the car. Her pulse pounded in her ears. This couldn't be happening. She couldn't let Oliver be dragged into this. But before she could reach the car, another voice rang out, this time a woman. "Serafina, can you tell us about your relationship with Callum Hawthorne? Have you two been in contact over the past 5 years?" Serafina turned and saw two more reporters. A sharp, icy wave of panic washed over her. She had braced herself for Callum's return. She had not prepared for this. The world was watching. She glanced down at Oliver, saw his wide, confused eyes staring up at her. He was only 5. He didn't deserve this. Serafina swallowed hard, shoving her fear aside as she yanked the car door open and ushered Oliver inside. "Get in, sweetheart." Her voice was urgent but firm. "And keep your head down." Oliver obeyed, though his small voice wavered. "Mommy, who are they?" "No one, baby. Don't worry." She forced her tone to remain steady, but her hands trembled as she shoved the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. Tires screeched against the pavement as she sped away from the apartment complex. But even after the reporters were out of sight, even as the buildings blurred past her window, her heart wouldn't slow down. Questions hammered inside her skull. This was just the beginning. If this continued, would Oliver still be able to go to school like a normal child? Would other kids mock him? Would they ever be able to walk outside without someone recognizing them? She couldn't let that happen. She had to protect her son. And if that meant leaving, cutting ties, disappearing from Callum's life once again, then she would, even if it broke her heart. The small Oakland apartment had never felt this suffocating, not because of space, but because of the unbearable weight in the air. Callum stood there, right in the middle of the cramped living room, his gaze burning with an emotion Serafina had never seen in him before. Desperation, but not the desperation of a man who was powerless. The desperation of a man who refused to lose. Callum Hawthorne had always been in control, a ruthless businessman, a man who never let emotions dictate his decisions. But right now, he wasn't a CEO. He was a man afraid of losing the most important thing in his life. And that terrified Serafina more than anything else. She clenched her fists, forcing her voice to stay steady. "You can't be here, Callum." Callum let out a quiet laugh, a laugh devoid of humor. "Do you really think you can leave?" His voice was low, controlled. "Serafina, you're dealing with a man who never lets go of what's his." Her body tensed. "I'm not yours." She met his gaze, fire burning in her eyes. Callum stepped closer, closing the space between them. "Aren't you?" He tilted his head, eyes locking onto hers. "Then why are you shaking when you talk to me? Why are your bags packed as if you're running away?" Serafina had no response, because he was right. She was running, not just from Callum, but from herself. He saw her hesitation, and he seized the opportunity. He moved closer, his voice dropping to a rough whisper, laced with quiet authority. "Do you really think I'll let you walk away that easily? Oliver is my son. You are the woman I love." He paused, letting those words sink into the heavy silence between them. Then, he inhaled deeply, as if the admission itself had cost him something. "I lost you once." His jaw clenched, his fingers twitching at his sides. "I can't lose you again." A sharp tremor ran through Serafina's body. She looked at him, truly looked at him. This wasn't the Callum Hawthorne she had once known. Not the ruthless, calculating man who prioritized power and wealth above all else. The man standing before her was someone willing to walk away from everything just to hold on to her and their son. "I'll do whatever it takes." His voice broke slightly, but his resolve never wavered. "If you want me to leave the company, I will. If you want me to disappear from the media, I'll do it. If you need proof," his voice turned raw, "I will spend a lifetime proving it to you." Then he reached out, fingertips brushing against her cheek. "Just don't go." Serafina stopped breathing. She felt the warmth of his touch, the ghost of his breath, so close it made her dizzy. And for a fleeting second, she wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe he had changed, that he wouldn't walk away this time, that he wouldn't break her the way he had before. But she had believed him once, and it had shattered her. With a sharp inhale, she yanked her hand away and took a step back. "I can't." Her voice barely rose above a whisper, but it carried 5 years of pain. She turned away, wiping a tear before it could fall. "I can, Callum." For the first time, Callum Hawthorne didn't know what to do. He couldn't force her. He couldn't fix this with money. He couldn't rewrite the past. And for the first time in his life, he felt helpless. But just as he thought he had lost everything, "Mommy," a small voice echoed through the room. Both Callum and Serafina froze. They turned at the same time. Oliver stood in the doorway, his big, glassy gray eyes filled with innocent confusion. And for a moment, time stopped. Then, slowly, the little boy spoke. "Mommy, I want a daddy." 3 words. 3 simple words. Yet they landed like a punch straight to Serafina's chest. She froze. Her breath hitched. The entire room felt like it was collapsing in on itself, drowning in a silence so thick it was suffocating. Even Callum, who always had an answer for everything, stood completely still. Serafina turned, and her heart clenched at the sight before her. Oliver stood in the doorway of his bedroom, his small frame trembling. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but he knew one thing. His mother was crying, and his father was there. For the first time in his life, he saw both his parents in the same room. But instead of holding hands like the other families he had seen, they were fighting. Oliver rubbed at his eyes, but the tears kept falling. "Mommy, don't fight anymore." His voice wavered. "Please don't cry." Serafina felt something inside her crack. She had spent her entire life protecting Oliver from pain. She had done everything in her power to make up for the fact that he had grown up without a father. She had convinced herself that as long as she loved him enough, he wouldn't need anyone else. But now, looking into her son's tear-filled eyes, she realized a painful truth. Oliver needed Callum, not because Callum was wealthy, not because he could offer a better life, but because Callum was his father, and nothing could change that. Serafina felt her heart break. "Baby," she stepped forward, kneeling in front of Oliver, her trembling hands cupping his tear-streaked face. "You have me, don't you?" Her voice wavered. "I'm always here for you." Oliver nodded, but the tears didn't stop. "But I want a daddy too." His voice cracked, his big gray eyes pleading. "Why don't I have one like my friends? Why isn't my daddy here?" Serafina choked back a sob. She had no answer. She had prepared every justification, every excuse, every reason to defend her decision. But she had no answer for this, because Oliver wasn't thinking about the past. He wasn't interested in blame or regret. He just wanted a family, someone to hold his hand when his mother was too tired, someone to cheer for him at school events, someone to call Dad. Serafina shattered. She pulled Oliver into her arms, holding him tightly as her entire world fell apart. She had thought she knew what was best for him, but now she wasn't sure anymore. A shadow loomed over them. Callum was still standing there, motionless. For days, he had tried to convince Serafina. He had argued. He had fought to prove his resolve. But nothing he had said, none of it, mattered as much as Oliver's words. Because in the end, Oliver was the only one who truly had the right to judge whether Callum deserved to be in his life. And right now, Callum was not a CEO, not a billionaire, not a powerful man who controlled markets with a single decision. He was just a father watching his son beg for a family. A strange, unfamiliar ache spread through his chest. It wasn't anger. It wasn't the desperate need to regain control. It was regret. He hadn't been there, not because he had chosen to abandon them, but because it didn't change the fact that Oliver had grown up without him. He took a step forward, then stopped, because for the first time in his life, he didn't know what to do. A helplessness settled over him. He had fought against everything: competitors, ruthless boardrooms, the weight of an empire resting on his shoulders. But he couldn't fight his own son's tears. Oliver, Callum started, but then hesitated, because he didn't know what to say. How did he make up for 5 lost years? How did he erase all the nights Oliver had fallen asleep without knowing his father existed? How did he become a real father now? He had no answers, but he knew one thing. He wouldn't walk away, no matter what happened. No matter if Serafina fought him every step of the way. He would stay, because Oliver needed him, and he needed his son. Did this moment bring you to tears? Leave a like if you feel for Oliver. The apartment was silent. Not the kind of peaceful silence, but the kind that came after something had been ripped apart. Oliver was still curled up in Serafina's arms, his tiny body trembling with the last remnants of his tears. His breathing was uneven, little hiccups escaping every now and then. Callum stood there, unmoving. For the first time in his life, he felt truly powerless. He had built an empire. He had made decisions that could shake the financial world with a single signature. But being a father? He had never learned how to do that. But for the first time, he knew what he had to do. Not negotiate, not fight with Serafina, but protect Oliver, even if it meant standing against the whole world. The next morning, Callum sat in his office at Sterling Technologies, staring at the glaring headline on the screen. Callum Hawthorne to make official statement at this morning's press conference. Will he deny the rumors about his alleged son? A single denial, one lie, and everything would go back to normal. But Callum knew he couldn't do it, because if he denied Oliver, he would lose him forever. And this time, he couldn't lose his son. The press conference room was stifling. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with expectation. Rows of journalists sat packed into the space, cameras, microphones, and recorders all trained on one person. Callum Hawthorne, the man at the center of the storm. He looked every bit the billionaire CEO, the epitome of power and control. Tailored black suit, silk tie knotted perfectly, sharp jawline betraying not a single ounce of weakness. To anyone watching, he was a man who could manipulate public perception with a single statement. And this was the moment. One lie, one carefully crafted response. All he had to do was look straight into the cameras and say Oliver Ellis was not his son, and the world would move on. The media would find another scandal. The shareholders would be reassured. Sterling Technologies would remain untouched, and he would have his life back. No ties, no responsibilities, no vulnerability. Across the table, his attorney leaned in, voice low and urgent. Just say no. Deny it, Callum, and this all disappears. Callum didn't respond. He only stared at the flashing camera lights, at the expectant faces waiting for him to speak. But in his mind, all he saw was Oliver. Those storm gray eyes, his eyes. The way Oliver had cried, asking, "Mommy, why don't I have a dad?" Callum's grip tightened on the edge of the table. He could deny Oliver in front of the world, but Oliver would never forgive him. His son would grow up wondering, why didn't my father want me? And Callum would carry that regret for the rest of his life. He couldn't do it. For the first time ever, Callum Hawthorne didn't care about stocks or reputation or wealth. For the first time, he was willing to risk it all. For his son, a reporter stood, his voice cutting through the heavy silence. "Mr. Hawthorne, can you confirm, is Oliver Ellis your son?" The room fell into absolute stillness. All eyes were on him. Callum slowly lifted his head, and for the first time, his gaze wasn't cold. He had made his decision. The press conference room fell frozen in time. All cameras were pointed at Callum. Reporters held their breath. Shareholders around the world were watching the live broadcast. Every employee at Sterling Technologies had their eyes glued to the screen, waiting to see what their CEO would do. All it would take was one simple denial. A few words like, "This is nothing but a baseless rumor," and it would all be over. But Callum didn't deny it. Slowly, he rose to his feet, and then, in a voice low yet filled with undeniable authority, he declared, "My name is Callum Hawthorne." He paused for a second, his sharp gaze sweeping across the room. "And I am Oliver Ellis's father." The words landed like an earthquake. For a moment, absolute silence. Then, boom, 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 a flurry of movement. Dozens of reporters shot to their feet. Cameras clicked frantically. Hands flew into the air. Questions rained down like a storm. Mr. Hawthorne, why are you admitting this now? Will this child affect your company's image? Who is the child's mother? Do you plan to marry her? Callum didn't flinch, didn't waver. He stood firm, unshaken, unmoved, facing the world head on. No avoiding, no denying, no hesitation. He had made his choice, and he didn't regret it. Miles away, in a small Oakland apartment, Serafina stared at the screen, her heart pounding. She couldn't believe it. Callum had done something she never thought he would. He could have easily walked away, taken the safe route, protected the reputation he had spent years building. But he didn't. He chose Oliver. And for the first time, Serafina felt the wall she had built around herself for 5 years begin to crack. Serafina couldn't tear her eyes away from the screen. She thought she knew Callum. She thought he was a man who placed work, power, and reputation above all else. She thought, in the end, he would take the easy way out, deny Oliver to protect the world he had built. But the man standing on that stage shattered everything she once believed about him. My name is Callum Hawthorne, and I am Oliver Ellis's father. The words rang out like a declaration, undeniable, unwavering. No hesitation, no doubt. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't running. He had willingly stepped into the fire, standing in the center of the storm, facing ruthless questions, accepting the consequences, just to protect their son. Serafina felt her chest tighten. This wasn't the man she had known 5 years ago. That man had walked away from her. That man had chosen his career over love. But the man standing before a sea of cameras now was a father willing to risk everything for his child. Her hands trembled. She wanted to find a reason to dismiss this, a reason to convince herself that Callum hadn't changed. But she couldn't, because what he just did, it was real. No one fakes something like this. No one gambles their entire reputation just to prove something that doesn't matter. But to Callum, Oliver mattered. And in that moment, Serafina realized she had been wrong. She had underestimated him. She had let the pain of the past blind her to the present. She had believed she was the only one fighting for Oliver. But Callum was fighting too. He was fighting for the family he lost. And for the first time in 5 years, Serafina felt something crack inside her. Tears slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them. For the first time, she believed him. For the first time, she saw him not as the man who had hurt her, but as the father Oliver deserved. And for the first time, she asked herself, was she still strong enough to keep pushing him away? The press conference ended in a frenzy of flashing cameras and shouted questions. Headlines exploded across every major news outlet. Callum Hawthorne publicly acknowledges his son to the world. Powerful CEO willing to risk it all for his family. But Callum didn't care about the headlines. The moment he stepped out of that overcrowded room, only one thought consumed him. Oliver. A small apartment in Oakland. Not a grand estate. Not a 5-star hotel. But the second Callum walked through the door, it became the most important place in his world. Serafina was there. And so was Oliver. The little boy still wore the same superhero t-shirt Callum had seen him in before, but something was different now. There was no hesitation, no fear, only anticipation. Callum stood frozen at the doorway, afraid to take another step. He had spent his entire life making bold decisions, never second-guessing himself. But right now, he had no idea what Oliver would do. He had claimed his son in front of the world. But was that enough for Oliver to claim him back? 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, and then Oliver ran straight into his arms. Callum barely had time to react before he felt a tiny pair of arms wrapped tightly around him. The boy held on to him. No hesitation, no fear. A hold so fierce, so unshakable, as if letting go meant losing Callum all over again. Callum stood still. The warmth of that small body seeped into his own, filling every corner of his heart with something he had never felt before. And then, in the softest, most fragile voice, "Can we start over?" The question shattered him. Callum closed his eyes, feeling his throat tighten, his chest constricting with an ache so raw it nearly brought him to his knees. He had never begged for a second chance in his life. But right now, his son was offering him the most precious gift of all, a chance to make things right. Callum crouched down, holding Oliver even closer. "Yes, son." His voice cracked with emotion. "We can start over. I promise." Serafina stood nearby, watching them. She had spent 5 years believing she could create a world where Oliver didn't need Callum. But now, as she watched her son cling to his father like he had just found a missing piece of himself, she knew she had been wrong. Oliver had always needed Callum, and maybe she did too. Serafina took a deep breath, then stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Callum's shoulder. He looked up, meeting her gaze, gray eyes locking onto deep brown. No words were spoken, but they didn't need them. They both understood. This wasn't the end. This was a beginning. The sun dipped lower behind the towering buildings of San Francisco, painting the sky in hues of soft amber and gold. Callum, Serafina, and Oliver walked together along the quiet path by the bay, with the sunset stretched out before them like a golden ribbon. No one spoke, but they didn't need to. Oliver walked between them, his small hands tightly gripping both Callum's and Serafina's, as if afraid that if he let go, one of them might disappear. Callum felt the warmth of that tiny hand in his own, a feeling both unfamiliar and strangely natural. For the first time in his life, he felt whole. Serafina glanced sideways at Callum. 5 years ago, they had walked down separate paths, burdened by wounds too deep to heal. But tonight they walked side by side. Nothing was perfect. The past still lingered, the scars still fresh. But they had a chance to love, a chance to mend what was broken, a chance to build a family, not the way it was before, but in a way that was entirely their own. Oliver looked up at Callum, his gray eyes sparkling under the fading sunlight. "Dad, can we have pizza tonight?" Callum smiled, a real smile, one no one had ever seen before. Warm, genuine, free of the walls he had once built around himself. He squeezed Oliver's hand gently and nodded. "Of course, son." Serafina watched them, a quiet sigh slipping from her lips. Maybe she wasn't ready to say that everything was perfect. Maybe she wasn't ready to trust Callum completely. But one thing she knew for certain, they were on the right path. And for the first time in a long time, she believed that someday everything would truly be okay. The story closes with the image of Callum, Serafina, and Oliver walking forward together. Not perfect, but full of hope. If you believe in redemption and second chances, hit like and share this story now. Thank you for following along until the very end. You are the reason we keep telling heartfelt stories like this.